I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our daily rapid chess speedrun. In today's video, we're going to be playing a 10+5 rapid game. In our last game, we made some pretty bad blunders, and we actually lost the game in Sicilian, which I don't think has happened to us yet. And it just tells us that, our opponents are getting better. We are playing more complicated positions every single game, and we're going to have to be on our A game to keep winning games. So I'm going to make sure I focus, and as well, I'm going to make sure I explain all my moves. Every detail is going to be relayed to you guys, and I'm just going to sort of let you in on the mindset that I have when I'm facing these complicated positions and certain things I'm always watching out for. So with that being said, I'm super excited to just get right into the game. And we've had the black pieces a few times recently. I'd like to have the white pieces, just so I can show you a bit more of what I'm thinking for an attack strategy with the white pieces. I believe we are going to be playing d4 on the first move in this game if we get white. But we do get black, so we are going to have another game with the black pieces. And today I would like to play the Caro-Kann. The Caro-Kann starts with c6. So your opponent plays e4, and you go with c6. And here our opponent goes for what's called the hillbilly attack in the Caro-Kann. And this is a very common opening at the lower levels. And it's kind of a poor move for one main reason. The main reason is that the hillbilly attack allows you to play d5 with tempo. This is a move you're going to play no matter what in the Caro-Kann anyways. And here, your opponent's bishop has to drop back. It can drop to b5, or it can drop all the way back to b3. So you have a few options. And the first thing we're going to do is we just want to get our bishop out, and we want to play e6 as soon as possible. Alright, and our bishop has come out, and we are going to play e6. And our development in this position is super smooth. I love these positions. They're very easy to play. Our knights are going to come out to their normal squares on c6 and f6. And our bishop is going to go to either e7 or d6. Sometimes it will go to b4, but not usually, because we don't want to allow our opponent to play this move c3 with tempo. c3 is a move that our opponent is going to want to play in most positions anyways. So we don't need to, we don't have any reason to allow our opponent to play that with tempo. So here I've noticed that our opponent has developed his dark squared bishop first. So we're not really concerned about the pin. So I think this move, knight f6, is a perfect move, taking further control of this e4 square. And our opponent wasted tempo. He plays bishop e3, and then he also plays bishop f4. So that just lets me know that he's not really sure about where he wants to commit his dark squared bishop, which is fine with me. I think we can take advantage of him wasting a tempo like this by just using that tempo to develop our piece. We want to develop our knight to attack this pawn, which for now is pretty weak. He has not played this key move c3 yet to solidify a pawn chain, and we can take that as an advantage for us. And he's wasting another tempo. Here he's decided to play bishop a4, which, yes, does pin our knight, but it's not too concerning for a few reasons. One of them is if he takes, we can just take back with the pawn, and then we can actually use this pawn to attack the center. So the pawn is probably better on c6 than it is on b7 anyway. So I'd say he's improving our position by taking. So we're really not going to worry about taking. We don't want to do anything really here special. We can develop our bishop to e7 or to d6. Now this bishop isn't a great piece per se, but it is kind of annoying. Our dark square bishop really doesn't have a great square to access at this moment. That being, the d file is closed, and this d6 square is probably the square that where the bishop would have the most impact. So what I'm going to do here is I want to just put my bishop right here and offer the trade. And the trade of bishops is nice for a few reasons. First of all, we get our queen up, and as soon as we castle, our rooks are going to be connected, which is awesome. We're going to start being able to exploit this c file. Alright, and our opponent keeps moving his bishop. So notice how he's, if we go back a little bit, we've developed a knight, we developed another knight, and he's just been moving these bishops around all willy-nilly. Here he's actually put his bishop on a worse square than it was, and we have excellent control. So now we can castle our king, and we're very ahead in development. Neither of his knights have moved, he's not able to castle soon, and we just have the premier development for our pieces. Alright, so I'm noticing a few things here. First of all, our knight here can start to create a few different attacks. One I like is g4, or knight g4. Knight g4 is nice because the response f3 doesn't do anything. It actually blunders the bishop in one move. So it creates this nagging pressure, which can be annoying. As well, I'm also noticing that we're going to want to put our rook on the c-file and move this knight. This knight, whether to attack the center like here or do something else. We can create a lot of pressure in the position just by moving our pieces. So first thing I want to do though is get our rook to the open file. Alright, and our opponent has decided to advance his g-pawn. Now the g-pawn is being attacked twice by our knight and our bishop, and only defended once by the queen. The other thing I'm noticing is, of course, if we do take with the knight here, we are continuing to have the threat of taking the bishop, as well as disallowing this move f3, because we'll be taking the bishop for free. So I'm just going to take this free pawn that our opponent has given us, and I am starting to get really excited about this position. I'm starting to feel like our opponent is not playing very well, and they're just not playing by principles. They haven't developed either of their knights yet. Their bishops are kind of inactive. This bishop is not even pinning the knight anymore, and this bishop is just guarding the pawn, which is already being guarded by the queen. And we see here that our opponent does make the critical error. We talked about how this f3 move was impossible because of the bishop hanging, and now we have all the tools to exploit that. So we are going to take, and not only are we going to take, but we're taking with an attack on the queen, and our opponent's position is lost. He's not going to be able to recover this one unless he makes some very, very smart, accurate moves. Now notice a few things in this position. First of all, we have the capacity to give a check here, and our opponent just resigns. Wow. Opponent wants a rematch, but what I'm going to do is just to analyze this game. I am very confused about how my opponent played. I think it was very hasty for them to only use 1 minute, and they allowed us to get everything we wanted, and in this position, I think resigning is not at all premature. Alright, so 12 moves. Wow. Very quick game. Yeah, and the position is dead lost here. For a few different reasons. Now, the computer actually says that knight c3 is the best move, allowing us to just take the queen. Wow. Alright. Very interesting game. Let's go back to the beginning. And this is the Caro-Kann defense. Caro-Kann starts off with c6, and pretty much in every case, you're going to play d5. Now, there's a bunch of different variations of the Caro-Kann. And since today we did have a shorter game, I am going to give you a bigger rundown on openings and strategies and ideas, because as we get higher up in the ratings, we're going to need to do that more. That's more important as people get better at the game. So yeah, let me take a quick sip of water here. Alright, so the main ways to play against the Caro-Kann are to play d4, and then here in this position there's a few different ways you can play it. You can protect your pawn with the knight or your pawn. You can advance, that's called the advanced Caro-Kann, or you can take. This is called the exchange Caro-Kann. There's also, from this position, you can play very simple move. knight f3, or you could play c3, but another way to play it is with c4. This is called the Panov attack. So there's a few different ways to play the Caro-Kann. I actually did a short video yesterday where we saw Gotham Chess versus Hans Niemann, and Gotham Chess played the Fantasy Caro-Kann. This is another way to play, where you defend your pawn and you get a position like this with two pawns in the center, and white's going to get a strong attack and have strong development for his bishops and his knights. But here we saw a lesser known variation, but it is played very commonly at lower levels, the hillbilly attack. Now the hillbilly attack can be strong because you can get a very strong attack quickly on black center, and you're able to create a lot of pressure, especially with this move, queen h5, but we didn't see this move. So this is how it goes. Usually you play d5, you trade pawns in the center, and your opponent is going to drop their bishop back to b3. And mostly in the Caro-Kann, your main goal is you want to get your light squared bishop out to either f5 or g4, and then you want to play e6 and develop your pieces. So it's very simple. Get your light squared bishop out, play e6, and get the rest of your pieces out and castle mostly to the king side. Because usually the c file is going to be open, and you don't want to have your king on an open file where the opponents can create an attack on you very quickly. So here that's exactly what we did. We developed our bishop to f5. Our opponent played d4, which is a fine move, and we played e6, and already our opponent, they've played some okay moves, but the computer thinks we're slightly better because we have the development. We have the light squared bishop out. Their light squared bishop is kind of just biting on some granite. It's hitting this pawn chain that's not going to be softened very easily. And we are going to be able to create long-term attacks on this pawn eventually when we create the rook on the file and we get our knight jumping out. It's going to be difficult for them to defend this pawn. We're going to force them to advance the pawn. But anyways, they developed their bishop to a kind of inactive square. This bishop, yes, it defends the pawn, but this move c3 needs to be played no matter what, because they're not going to be able to sustain this pawn unless it's defended by another pawn at some point. So I think the bishop's placement on e3 is kind of redundant. It keeps our opponent from playing a move that they should be playing. And I think they realize that, so they move their bishop to f4, thinking, hey, bishop on f4 is much more active than a bishop staring behind the pawn here. So I agree, that was probably a good move. Engine says it was the best move, actually. But here we go. We develop our knights, and notice we've got two knights developed, influencing the center. We've got this strong bishop. Our opponent has this one bishop that's good, but the other bishop is kind of just weak, not really doing much. It's just hitting this pawn, and our opponent thinks the same, so they develop their bishop again to a4. Now here, queen b6 would have been the best move. Very strong move. You're creating a double attack on this pawn and this pawn as well, forcing our opponent to make some sort of concession. b3 would have been a concession they'd have to make. But here we just go with a very simple move, bishop d6. Bishop d6 is nice because, first of all, we're developing our bishop with tempo. So our opponent has to respond in some way. They can take, and then we get to develop our queen, or they can drop their bishop back to an inferior square. And here that's what they did. They dropped their bishop back, right back to the square they were at, and we decided, you know what, we just want to get our king out of the center of the board. And if you count the pieces, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces out, and our king is castled. Our opponent has 2 pieces out, and neither of them are particularly good. So here the engine says we're already winning, and it's because of this lead in development. And our opponent continues to fall by the wayside. They don't develop their knights. They're not looking to castle as soon as possible. They're not looking to create any sort of attack with their queen or do anything. They move a pawn on the side of the board, and I guess you could advance your pawn all the way and start creating some attacks, but you're really leaving a lot of squares open. And this h4 move, as you might see, makes it so them playing g4 is really a difficult idea to pull off. Because there's no pawn that can support g4 with h3, g4 needs to be prepared with f3 or with pieces. And you've got one piece, but you need another because we've got 2 pieces defending that square. So, yeah, I think h4 is not really a good move. We just say, you know what, we're going to keep developing. In these positions, there's really a lot of ways to play. You can go for an attack immediately. The computer says that the most forcing and aggressive move you can play that would force open the position is this e5 move, which is a great move in hindsight. I think this makes sense why it's the top engine move, because what's going to happen is if you're, say for example, your opponent trades, we're going to have this open e-file to play with, and our opponent's king is going to go by the wayside. Here we're able to create a threat on the pawn, our opponent has to defend, and we can even break further with d4. We can also just play rook e8 and prepare discovered attacks along the file. So we've got all sorts of ideas here, and our opponent is just so behind in development. They're going to have to use their knight to defend, and we're going to be able to jump into the position, create all sorts of threats. Knights can hang. His knight has to go to the side of the board because now that he's been forced to play c3, this knight doesn't really have a good square. From here, it's just not able to jump to the center at all. So this would have been a great way to play, but the way we played still maintains the whole advantage. We just develop our rook. We're planning on playing on this c file, which is why we placed the bishop on this f5 square in the first place. It's a great piece, creating a long-lasting attack, forcing our opponent to play c3, which of course solidifies his pawn chain, but the downside of c3 is this knight is not going to have a great place to go immediately. So there's pluses and minuses for our opponent. And here our opponent just blunders a pawn. He sees that, yes, he wants to knock away our bishop, but there's nothing supporting this pawn other than the queen, and we've got two pieces defending, so we can just take this pawn, and that's what we do. And I talked a lot about how our opponent would have to be careful when our knight got to g4, because there's no good way to kick it out. And that's the doom of advancing your side pawns like this. When you've played h4, you're never going to play h3. There's never going to be a pawn on this square. Pawns never go backwards. So for this knight to be kicked out by a pawn, it's going to have to be this f pawn. But since the f pawn is protecting the bishop, it can't move. So our opponent, maybe frustrated about their position that they blundered a pawn, frustrated that their pieces aren't developed and their king is still in the center, very unsafe. They do end up making this blunder f3, and we get a free bishop. And this free bishop comes with the price of tempo on the queen as well. And our opponent is going to have to make some sort of concession here. The engine actually suggests the top move, knight c3. Wow. And we could have followed it up with this nasty check, bishop g3, forcing the king to d2. And then we'd be able to take on d1. Opponent would take back with the rook or the king, either way. And just look at this position. Our opponent is down a queen for nothing. We're getting another pawn. Our bishop is attacking here. Our other bishop is attacking here. There's pawns hanging everywhere. This knight cannot move. I mean, this is just going to be a devastating position. And not to mention, we have a queen that can jump into the action whenever and create all sorts of threats. So I completely understand why our opponent resigned. It did look completely lost to me, especially when you consider this variation. Another variation, queen d2, we'd have the option of playing this bishop g3 move again. His king jumps up, and we're able to give this check, or not give this check, sorry, give this discovered attack against the queen. And the queen can go to a few different squares. It says bishop c6. Bishop takes c6 is the best move. Queen c3 is another option. And yeah, we're going to break in the center. We're going to open up the file, and this king is toast. So I feel like this game was kind of poorly played by our opponent, but I think this game highlights key principles of chess. And this is why I love the Caro-Kann, because Caro-Kann teaches you a lot of the ideas that you need to know to play chess effectively at a basic level. And those are this. When you're in the opening, you want to develop your pieces. You don't want to move the same piece around too many times, and you want to be sure you're using your moves effectively. Here, we took all of our moves very effectively. We had a plan. We want to move our bishop first, then play e6 so this bishop isn't blocked in, and then we develop the rest of our pieces. We castle, and then we start putting our rook on the open file, and then we can start attacking. Now we have all our pieces in the game. We can start using our minor pieces to attack. We can start playing with pawns. We can start opening files for rooks. We can do all sorts of stuff. And it's because we have the superior piece development that we're just going to have better control over the board. And as you can see here, we didn't play any moves that were very complicated, but our opponent kind of just cracked under the pressure. Because very quickly the position, it doesn't look like we have a major attack, but all these opportunities start showing up for us, and it's because we've got all these pieces on excellent squares. Because we have control over g4, we can take the pawn for free. Because we've got control over this diagonal, and this diagonal, and this diagonal, we've got everything we want. So, yeah guys, I hope this game serves as kind of like a cautionary tale for how quickly you can get behind in development if you don't take your turns in stride. Make sure you're making clear, concise moves, and not moving the same pieces over and over again. Think about the placement of your piece and if it's going to be effective on that square. That way you don't have to move it later. So yeah guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I think it was a very instructive game. Our opponent did not play well, but we're able to see the flaws in their gameplay, and through that we can learn ways to improve our own gameplay. So yeah, I hope you guys are looking forward to the next video. I'm going to be putting out daily content. Every single day there's going to be either a short video or a rapid speed run. So look forward to that, and if you have any ideas or openings you'd like to see played, I would be super excited to make a video on them. So just drop it in the comments below, and I will love hearing you guys' ideas. So have a good rest of your day. See ya.